What was one experience in your life that hardened you as a person? Gosh. Working in the back of an ambulance, you see so many terrible things. One that does stick with me was a call for a 30-year-old female for suicide. She jumped before we got there. But she was still conscious and very much alive. She hit a balcony on the way down and smashed her arm. Huge open fracture. That itself isn't very memorable. But when we got there and got our high-vis jackets on, I looked over to my partner who was a few feet ahead of me. Just standing there, shocked. I looked at the patient and she was biting and ripping at her fracture. And I don't know why it fucked me up so bad. Just the notion that someone could be mentally unstable and deranged enough to shred and pull at her own flesh. It was something else. Just one. Taking care of my stepdad while he died of mad cow disease. Runner-up. My bio dad having a degenerative brain disease. PSP. And calling me at work slurring his words. We never had the greatest relationship and I was on the clock and told him I had to go. Had no idea what he was saying. He then wrote down numbers and names of family members and put them in his pocket and drove into a tree. He didn't make it. Prison is rough. Not the worst experience of my life, but it definitely changed me. My mum being diagnosed with cancer months after my son was born and dying within 2 months was rough. She would have been the best grandma and we all loved her dearly. No only are we no contact with my wife's family. My dad decided getting engaged within a year and hardly spending any time with his new grandson was the best course of action. The summer after my son was born we ended up losing an entire support system other than the occasional visit from a very self-centered old bastard with no shame or honor, and it was the nail in the coffin for my faith in humanity. Being related to a mass shooter. The unanswered questions and the guilt took years to get over. Not to mention being triggered by looking at the news every other week it seems. Sexual abuse. Overdose. Homelessness. In that order. Things are a world away from where I was 10 years ago, and I put a lot of that on the fact that there isn't much of a reason as to how I survived. But I'm still fucking here. Now. To make sure that nothing like that ever happens to my wife or her boy. And hopefully another little one next year. Having unsympathetic, emotionally abusive parents. I learned over the years that my family does not care about me unless I act a certain way for them. If I ever say how I truly feel, they'll disown me and probably try to physically abuse me as well. I was groomed by a man in his 30s when I was 17. Not quite pedo, and 17 was the age of consent where I lived. But looking back, the relationship was abusive and manipulative. I've had intimacy issues ever since. After going to therapy, I've learned that everyone knew something was wrong with me but never cared enough to guide me to help. I was called a pack animal, lol. When I left my abusive wife, after asking friends for help for years, not a one friend stood by me. Homelessness. It opened my eyes to how hypocritical charity can be. And how little people care about their neighbors. Delivering ineffectual first aid to an 8-year-old girl who had been crushed against a store wall by a drunk, drugged-up driver. My girlfriend kicked me out when she was 3 months pregnant because I didn't make enough money. And told me I'd never see our son. 13 years later. I'm a very involved dad who fought like a bastard for shared custody. And don't regret a thing. No throwaway. Got molested for 2 years by a football coach. 38 complaints against him. 7 of us went to court. The odds were heavily in his favor. I realized at that time that there is no justice. He got away with it. My grandmother rented my sister and I out to drug dealers for drugs when we were kids. She still haunts my dreams. Asterisk gestures vaguely in the direction of the Marine Corps. When my girlfriend committed suicide. Getting cheated on when our son was a newborn and I was going through a cancer scare. Then husband killed himself when I found out. I will never trust or love with my whole heart again. The volume of pain he inflicted was just too much. My mum telling me she wouldn't and couldn't ever love me because I'm too much like my dad was a kicker. So I'm police. When I was a rookie patrol officer, I was the first to respond to a father that shot and killed his 12 and 8-year-old sons in front of their mother. Then he shot and killed himself. The 8-year-old was still alive when I got there, but died very soon after. Hardening is both good and bad. PTSD is no joke and I'm living testimony. But someone has to be able to respond to these calls and not lose their cool. And I can do that. First responders. Fire, EMS, police. Nurses, doctors and military too kind of have to do a baptism by fire with stuff like this. I'm not unique.